Hello, and welcome to the final session of the Life Sciences Digital Transformation webcast series presented by Moss Adams. Today's topic will be focused on improving your IT systems and infrastructure. Before we begin, I'm going to play a brief housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining. We're pleased to present our continuing professional education webcast series. Before we begin, please keep the following in mind. You can customize how you view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top right of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons that relate to a different aspect of our session. You can download a PDF of today's slides from the Slide Deck and Handouts widget. You can ask questions by typing in the Q&A window and clicking Submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session offers 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy requirements. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of polling questions. To participate in the polls, please check the button next to your answer within the slide window and click Submit. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget and download your CPE certificate. Don't worry if you can't download your CPE certificate today. We'll email you a copy in 2 weeks. If attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our group CPE attendance sheet, available in our Slide Deck and Handouts widget to receive credit. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. CPE credit can only be awarded to participants registered as themselves and isn't available for participants who view the on-demand version. This presentation is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Moss Adams, I would like to welcome you to our third and final part of our 3-part series, Digital Transformation for Life Sciences Companies. All companies, regardless of industry and size, are investing a lot into digital transformation. By using technology to automate processes and data flow, companies can run leaner, but there are risks. How do you coordinate the technology into your processes? What is the impact on your cybersecurity? And is your current system sufficient, or do you need to make some changes? These questions are all interrelated, and we will address each question. 2 weeks ago, we talked about how companies can strengthen their internal processes by utilizing technology and to do more with less. Last week, our cybersecurity team discussed strategies to improve your security posture and what all life sciences companies should be doing to protect their valuable data and intellectual property. Today, we'll discuss ways to improve systems and infrastructure. Companies are continuously implementing new software for various reasons. How do you find comfort in making sure that you choose the best software for your current situation? When do you need to change or upgrade? Are you optimizing the use of your systems? Our enterprise systems teams will walk you through the process that they go through in helping companies figure out what systems are best for them. My name is Richard Croghan, and I will be the moderator today. But the stars of the show will be Labi, Rabiu, and Chuck Andrews. Labi is a partner in our consulting group, specializing in enterprise systems consulting. Chuck is a senior manager in our consulting group who also specializes in enterprise systems consulting. As mentioned in the introductory video, we encourage all participants to use the Q&A feature during the call. To the extent that we have the time, we'll address your questions throughout the webinar and at the end if we have time. For now, I will turn it over to Labi to kick off today's presentation.
Thank you, Rich, and hi, everyone. We welcome you to our presentation today. For learning outcome, at the end of our presentation, you should be able to provide an overview of how to assess an existing system, discuss typical enterprise systems challenges that may lead to an assessment, and identify the solution options for enterprise systems challenges and key considerations for each option. We will start with a quick overview of our recommended approach for assessing enterprise systems. It's a tried and tested methodology we have used over several years on our assessment engagements. Then we'll turn our focus to the typical system challenges faced by organizations like yours, sharing some real-life examples, as Rich mentioned. And finally, we'll explore the type of solution options we have seen companies deploy to address these challenges and why one option may be preferable to another. Before we describe our recommended methodology for enterprise systems assessment, I thought it might be helpful to first describe why we need enterprise systems in the first place and the various types. Companies rely on enterprise systems to integrate and automate their business processes. In addition, these systems are supposed to provide several benefits, including automating the flow of information between the company and its business partners, like customers, vendors. They're supposed to provide reporting data for management to mine and make decisions on. And they're also expected to enable compliance with relevant internal and regulatory controls so that an organization's exposure to risk is limited. But oftentimes, a system is implemented and still fails to meet one or more of these objectives. Processes are still manual, reporting may be cumbersome or just non-existent. Or the system may be lacking necessary controls or other vital features needed to run the business. And here I'm talking about any type of enterprise systems, be it your accounting or ERP system, your customer relationship management system, your HR and payroll system, financial planning system, lab information management system, or clinical trial management system. So what do you do when you have challenges with any of these systems? When you're not getting the right kind of return on your investment in an enterprise system, it may be time to undertake an assessment of the system. And I'll be handing it off to my co-presenter, Chuck Andrews, who will take us through the details of our recommended methodology for assessment. But before we do that, let's take a quick poll. Rich?
Thank you, Labi. As mentioned in the introductory video, this presentation qualifies for CPE as long as you stay on for 50 minutes and answer 75% of the polling questions. We have 4 today, so you have to answer at least 3. The first question, what is your current status regarding systems assessment and improvement? So there's 4 options. Choose one of the options and don't forget to hit submit. I know sometimes that's been, people forget it. I've forgotten it at times, so just don't forget that last step. And again, if you have any problems during the presentation, you can use the Q&A function as well if you have any questions about the topics or your own personal situation. But as you're answering this, and I am stalling a bit just to make sure everyone has the time to answer it. But Labi, I guess as I read this question, the current status, I mean, how has the pandemic really changed companies' ongoing assessment and improvement process?
Well, that's actually a great question. One thing the pandemic did was to make a lot of companies realize that their systems have to be accessible. There has to be more collaboration. So what that meant was we saw a surge of clients who are inquiring about cloud-based solutions that could be accessed by their employees from anywhere in the world. Besides, a lot of the vendors have had a lot of their business partners and vendors have had to also make similar system changes. So that meant there has to be that seamless interaction between systems, between a company and its business partners. So with that came a wave of clients reevaluating their systems to upgrade to cloud-based, integrated cloud-based systems. And that trend continues till today.
All right, excellent, thank you. All right, we're going to close the poll. And what's your current assessment? Wow, 30% have nothing in place. But also impressively, 35% have a continuous improvement. So kind of scattered throughout. So with that, I'm going to turn it. I'm going to turn it over to Chuck to kind of talk through the assessment process.
Thanks, Rich. Looking at an overview of the assessment process that we conduct, the process is pretty simple at a high level. The first thing we have to get into is fact-finding. I kind of jokingly call it the paper chase, where we get into existing processes and kind of dig into the whole situation and get our feet on the ground. The second step is gap analysis and research, where we delve a little bit deeper into system requirements, how things need to look in the end state, and then obviously recommendation and planning in terms of where we need to go with the results of the assessment and how we're going to prioritize it. And then depending on the recommendations, if they include what I consider kind of a rip and replace of one or more systems, then you're potentially looking at a fourth aspect of the assessment process or the process in general, which would be a system selection. And for any initiative of this type, the first thing we have to look at is project management and change enablement, and really they're one and the same. And in doing that, we have to establish project governance, who's going to be guiding the project, what does the steering committee look like if that's the case, and really have to kind of figure out what the charter of the project is going to be, what's our overall goal from a strategic standpoint. A kickoff meeting is held for coordination of resources, both internal and external, if that's the case. A confirmation of the project scope, what are we looking at, what systems are we evaluating in the assessment, and getting together a project plan and scheduling some of the fact-finding sessions we're going to talk about here in the subsequent slides as we get deeper into the process. And obviously, the management of the project is evergreen, and communication is essential because we're trying to enable change here and also champion where we're going with the entire initiative. In the fact-finding phase, as you recall, I talked about the paper chase. The big thing we're going to dig into there is existing documentation, if it exists. We may walk through, when we're doing the interviews with stakeholders and process owners, document a process if that process hasn't been documented, at least the current state. And we're obviously going to walk through the existing system technology, one or more, to see what's in use today, how it's being used, and any pain points that we've identified. We're going to evaluate these processes in detail because we find typically that's where breakdowns occur. And when we're looking particularly at accounting processes, what we find is that typically breakdowns start very early in a process, be it at the pro forma transaction like a purchase order or a sales order. But the idea there is to look at the process in whole when we're doing that fact-finding, as well as gap analysis, which I'll get into here in a second. In terms of the current state and fact-finding, we do review the findings with the project team, and we confirm, what we found, and also kind of take a look at prioritization based on where we found pain points within those current states. Moving into gap analysis and research, what we're going to get into there is obviously documenting system requirements, thinking about things from an end state perspective. it's important to pin these down and figure out what is needed so that we're able to define which requirements are met and which requirements are not met. Those requirements that are not met are going to identify functionality gaps, and those are going to fall out, and we're going to be able to figure out where we have technical gaps in the system that we need to address based on the plan going forward. We're going to identify potential solutions if alternative solutions are needed, or integration points if we think that we're going to be moving into an integration project as part of the recommendation and planning. When we're looking at recommendations and planning, we're going to summarize our findings and our observations, and we're going to define the alternatives and the options to address the major business application gaps. And basically what we would mean there would be, do we need to consider the replacement of an application, or do we need to consider optimizing or re-implementing the way that that application is set up? We're going to define the same thing for technical difficulties in terms of maybe we've got a situation where we've got a performance issue or an application that won't distribute, as we mentioned when we were talking about the impact of companies with COVID and the fact that you had to distribute to even do approval processes. So I would definitely pin that down as a major technical infrastructure gap. And then we're going to develop and document recommendations in terms of what we're putting forth as a plan, and then work to prioritize that to create an implementation roadmap. So essentially look at what are the things that have to be done and collaboratively work and determine which ones need to be prioritized first and where are we going to get incremental gains as we move forward, where the incremental gains are needed. And then we're going to present that go-forward plan to the key stakeholders and get buy-in on that plan.
All right.
And Rich, I'll turn it over to you for the polling question.
All right, thank you. All right, so we have the second polling question on the screen right now. What, if anything, is preventing an initiative to improve your systems? If you're not one of the people that have that continuous improvement plan ongoing. So again, this is the second out of 4 polling questions, and you need to respond to at least 3 to get CPE credit. So I think it's pretty simple. Budget constraints or resource availability. I saw one, I guess, comment come in on Q&A. It's not really Q&A, but again, I understand it. And the comment was just lack of personnel. So I think I read that as they don't have IT people on staff. Chuck, what would you do with a company that doesn't really have professional IT there to oversee these implementations?
It's a common problem that we encounter in smaller and mid-market companies where, there's not a huge shared services department and you don't necessarily have the staff to deal with these projects that really, don't fall under the core line of business. You have a staff to keep the lights on, but not necessarily a staff to figure out what lights you're going to put in. And so we try to focus on staff augmentation that makes sense and come in and partner with clients to make certain we can get the assessments done and, kind of act as, that resource that's missing and, allow ourselves to be leveraged or bring in a third party if we think that we don't have the subject matter expertise to accomplish what needs to be done.
Okay, all right, that's helpful. All right, we have just about everyone submitted. We'll close the polls, and again, it's the 32% not applicable aligns with the continuous improvement group on the call. That's great. Budget constraints, hear that a lot. So, all right, now I will turn it over to Labi to talk about some of the common system challenges.
Yeah, thank you, Rich. We have talked about the methodology for assessment. Let's now explore some real-life examples of enterprise systems challenges as we've seen from dozens of assessments that we've done. We'll discuss a few scenarios we have encountered. We'll examine the implications for a business. And later on, we'll discuss options for resolving recurring system problems. So let's start with one of the most common ones, the business process automation challenge. As we've discussed, enterprise systems are supposed to reduce manual processes and allow for increased visibility across an organization to help improve decision making. But what if you already have an enterprise system, but a particular business process still lacks automation? In that case, there may be a need for a process-focused fit gap assessment. So consider the example of the all too common example of billing process automation. We had a client who does a lot of billing to healthcare providers, but whose system lacked basic billing automation. That meant they had to keep very manual spreadsheets to track billing schedules and timeline. And as their customer base grew, the billing process became error-prone and too cumbersome to track. And that compelled them to assess their automation options. There's also the example of payment process automation that we run into quite frequently. With that, we see companies doing more manual payment processes, thereby exposing the organizations to risks of fraud. And that is in spite of the fact that most modern ERP systems have features supporting direct integration with banks in the form of electronic funds transfer or automatic payment approval routing. Another example of automation challenge we've seen is when a system does not enable direct collaboration with customers, suppliers, contract manufacturers, or third-party logistic companies or other partners. Especially when you're dealing with businesses who require that information be transmitted via electronic data interchange between their system and yours. Then it may be necessary to assess your system for how to automate such data interchange. The need for automated procurement and approval workflow is another reason why we see clients embark on system assessments. With basic accounting systems like QuickBooks, there is often a lack of automated purchase approval workflow that is based on a company's approval policy. So that would force a need to automate that. We've also seen a myriad of challenges with supply chain and planning, or with manufacturing production processes, such that there's then a need to automate inventory planning and forecasting to meet customer demand or production scheduling. And those are just a few of the specific automation challenges we've seen. But there's another big one that forces, another big category of challenge that forces automation. And that is the reporting challenge. Reporting challenges are a major reason to conduct an assessment. User-friendly reporting, dashboards, KPIs, and the ability to measure corporate performance are some of the hallmarks of a truly powerful enterprise system. In many of our assessments, we've seen cases where the system is not able to meet specific management reporting needs, does not meet specific industry compliance needs, or is not user-friendly or intuitive, or not readily exportable to Excel, Word, or other third-party analysis systems. Oftentimes, the reporting output is just unreliable and requires too much forensic analysis to reconcile. And in many cases, the system reports just cost too much to maintain. As in the case when you need a dedicated person, a dedicated consultant, for example, just to help pull reports out of the system. If you're struggling with getting consolidated financial reports or operational reports on as needed basis, then it may be time to evaluate your options. We've seen a few instances where the problem is actually the manner a system is set up, but there are other cases where it's actually because of the outdated nature of the report engine of the system you're using. Internal control and compliance challenge is another major reason why we see companies undertake assessments. Internal control and compliance are mandatory in many situations, and in my view, both necessary and valuable in others. Failure to meet internal controls and regulatory compliance requirements within an enterprise system can lead to fraud, fines, or both. And some of these were actually touched on our very first webcast. There are many systems that are lacking in this regard. We've done several controls assessment projects where the control features actually do exist in the system, but clients have not enabled the features or don't have any process for monitoring key controls already enabled in the system. Take the example of the first item on the list here, which is Sox Controls. One of my pre-IPO clients recently implemented a mid-market system. They asked us to come in and assess it for SOX compliance. The assessment revealed inadequate controls for system access, security, change management, and other financial controls as required by SOX. There wasn't proper segregation of duties for roles and permissions, and they didn't require additional authentication beyond just email address and passwords for accessing the system. And they also didn't enable proper notification and approval for when changes are made to the system, which are all key SOX requirements. The good news for this client was that their system supported all of these controls. It only had to be implemented, and they didn't need to look beyond it to meet their SOX compliance needs. So we just set out the recommendations for clients on how to enable these features, and they were up and running. But that's not always the case. There are many ERP systems out there that are lacking in the range of features that are needed for SOX compliance, and as such have to be replaced before an organization can think about IPO. Aside from SOX, there are specific regulatory and industry compliance needs that may require reassessing the system. 21 CFR Part 11, which you see here, is one that we see a lot. 21 CFR Part 11, for those who don't know, codifies FDA requirements for electronic signature and audit trails before electronic records can be considered trustworthy. Another example that's based on regulatory requirement is current good manufacturing practices, CGMP, that's enforced by FDA to ensure proper controls over manufacturing processes and facilities. There's also the Sunshine Act, which requires companies dealing with healthcare providers to report aggregate expenditures and payments to these providers. If a system isn't able to help track this, then that forces an assessment of that system. HIPAA compliance is another reason you may need to assess your system to ensure that your system protects sensitive patient information. And for companies that collect customer credit card information, there may be a need to assess a system for proper controls to protect credit card data and comply with PCI, Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. If you're on an older system, that may be a challenge. And if you do business in the EU, GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, is the most important change in data privacy regulation in 20 years. And it may impose a significant burden on your organization if your ERP vendor is not already in compliance with GDPR and you do business in the EU. And the same goes for California Consumer Privacy Act, which went into effect in January 2020. These are just a few of the typical control and compliance needs that may require a system assessment that we've seen. Now, we have talked about some of the different challenges that may lead companies to undertake an assessment of their system. The reality is, in many cases, a combination of some or all of these challenges create the need to assess a system for feasibility and scalability to support all of a company's business processes. This type of assessment is called a comprehensive fit gap assessment. With a comprehensive fit gap assessment, using our methodology, we move in and document and prioritize the client's functional requirements. Then we assess the system's ability to meet the requirements with a focus on the items listed here. That is, number one, the technical platform of the system setup, configuration and reporting, the control automation features, which are all topics we've talked about. So it's really a combination of looking at all of this. The vendor roadmap for future upgrades and enhancement, and integrated system and other available solution within the vendor ecosystem, so that if you do need an integration, you can be rest assured that it is available within the vendor ecosystem. And the vendor system is also an open system with open APIs to allow integration. So with this information, we then present the client with an analysis of the degree of correlation of their system to their requirements. And as would be expected, this type of assessment takes longer than the more specific assessment projects that we discussed previously. It's really looking holistically at all of the reasons why a system may not be scalable to sustain an organization's growth path. And in terms of duration of this type of comprehensive fit gap analysis, it will depend on the type of system, obviously, and also the range of functional requirements that are in scope. I will now hand it off to Rich to take us through the next polling question.
Thanks, Labi. All right, I think you know the drill here. So this is our third polling question. So which areas of your systems have the most opportunity for improvement? We have five options. Choose one. There's no one's being graded on this. Just choose one and make sure that you hit submit. So, Labi, you had referenced kind of the first part of this webinar series, the systems control topic, and when you were talking about it, where I see, where you have the most opportunities for improvement, I always hear segregation of duties. Mm-hmm. Is that something that new systems and processes can solve?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we are dealing with the age of resource constraint, and with resource constraint, you really have to focus on how well roles and permissions have been segregated within a system, especially your ERP system. The key is to segregate as much as possible. And in cases where staffing constraint precludes segregation, then you should put in place appropriate mitigating controls. So, for example, someone who's going in and doing bank transactions, if that person is also doing bank reconciliation, well, someone else had better be reviewing their bank rec. Or you want to make sure that even with your staffing constraint, if someone is putting journal entries in, someone else is reviewing the journal entries and approving it, so that an individual is not both entering and approving their own entries. So it's really important to focus on segregation of duties, and is one of the areas where we're actually busiest, because clients often call on us to come assist with evaluating their system's capability to support SOD requirements. And of course, it's worth mentioning that after segregating, you want to make sure you conduct periodic review of your roles and permissions to identify any conflicts and continue to make organizational changes as needed.
Okay, all right, thanks. With that, I think we have 93% of people that have responded, so give everyone about 5 more seconds to choose and hit submit. All right. All right, so here are the responses. So automation, that's where the people think that they have the most opportunity for improvement. So, all right. Thanks all. And next up is solution options. And with that, I'll turn it over to Chuck.
Thanks, Rich. So at this point, we've taken you through the assessment process and covered some common challenges that we experience. And so what I'd like to get into now is, now that we've done this diligence, what are we going to execute on to get some gains and some improvements? So in looking at that, we typically find that the initiatives that come out of the assessment fall into 3 categories. We've got optimizations, which tends to focus on improving existing system setup and functionality. Integration, where we're bringing multiple systems together, or potentially a third-party best-of-breed solution to address a specific problem. Or replacement, which essentially means that we've either outgrown the system or the system is not hitting the mark, and we have to go out to the market and find out what system we're going to put in and migrate to going forward. So the first of those 3 options, the optimization, really is, it doesn't really apply when you've got, I'd say, basically a starter system, a QuickBooks type system, and you're experiencing some inflection or you're growing. Typically, this is when you've purchased a mid-range system, but haven't necessarily configured it correctly or implemented everything at your disposal that you can leverage for an automation, reporting improvements, or things of that nature. So the idea here is, again, getting an ROI out of that system that is going to be acceptable and also address the requirements that were uncovered during the assessment. We see that this is always including business process automation, and I find that everyone's interest seemed to be in that area because we are seeing a lot of that, doing more with less, getting some leverage behind the organization so that, revenue can increase without necessarily headcount. And then the last point I'll make here is that there are some qualifiers for optimizations. And the first one would be that the system that is being optimized is worth the effort of the optimization, that we have identified that we're not going to hit any walls, and that strategically the system is positioned to address the coming needs for the organization and is not going to allegedly box in the organization going forward. And the other qualifier would be what kind of time is spent on an optimization. And optimizations, the initiative for each optimization should be relatively agile, and we should not be looking at months of effort. If we're looking at months of effort, that would tend to characterize that we're probably in the wrong system to begin with. And so when we're looking at timeline, we should see some incremental gains in relatively short periods of time. Obviously, we want to be diligent about the optimization effort, but the optimization should not drag on and are indicative of the fact that we are potentially trying to optimize a system that truly doesn't meet the needs. The second type of a project that we see are integration projects. And this is one aspect is where we find that a certain aspect of what the business needs to accomplish, the current system doesn't do, but meets all other requirements. And I think that Labi covered a lot of the usual suspects we see in that area, which tend to be procure-to-pay automation or AP automation being one. expense management potentially being another. And in some cases, we run into, CRM being integrated. And so basically what we look at here is there are a couple of options here where in some cases there's pre-built integrations between systems where, an API automation system may have multiple built integrations for a number of ERP systems. There could be a situation where the ERP system recommends an integration platform as a service to accomplish the integration and potentially be leveraged in more than one integration if that's the case. If we have lots of what I would call best-of-breed solutions, we see situations where integration platform as a service is utilized frequently. As we're looking through that, we want to look at the total cost of the integration, the license cost, what does it cost to implement, and what are the ongoing costs. And especially in terms of integration platform as a service, you're essentially looking at a monthly cost that's going to come into play. And as we're evaluating costs, we obviously want to evaluate risk as well. When I look at integrations, I try to look for an integration that has been proven and used by other customers in that vertical and has accomplished the goal effectively. So essentially, as I indicated before, the common solutions that we see here for integration are CRM systems. And one of the aspects of that is that when we're looking at CRM, typically we're looking at the lead to order process. So what CRM systems do, part of their components is Salesforce automation, and we see the fact that a sales order is created. Well, in our world, that's a pro forma transaction. And so when we look at integrating a CRM, we're very mindful of the fact that we're creating something that's going to become an invoice. So I have something here that will be a posting transaction. And so the approach to the integrations that are going to create these pro forma transactions are vital to streamlining what effort has to go on in the back office, such that that pro forma transaction is ready to hit the general ledger the way that it needs to. Some other ones that we see here are sales tax engines when we're dealing with e-commerce or any kind of direct sales going on there. Product life cycle management. And some of the other ones that we've seen include, telecom management. But there are a number of them out there, and I find that typically they are either process-specific or vertical industry challenge-specific systems that need to be pulled in to the core system. And the final initiative that can come out of the assessment is the system replacement. And essentially, when I say replacement, that also involves a system selection, which is something we do quite a bit of. And when your assessment indicates that it's time to select a new system, I think that the process to select that system involves a lot of diligence. Much of that diligence has been accomplished by doing the assessment, where we're looking at strategic goals, we're looking at the business events, pivots, exits, acquisitions, and then, defining the key requirements. Again, layered into the assessment. And what we're going to do there is make certain we've done that internal diligence first before we're talking to vendors and framing out that conversation in terms of what we need. And at that point, we look at options to come up with a list of potential vendors that can solve the problem or, be the system of choice. And we publish an RFP that incorporates the business requirements that we found during the assessment and have the vendors respond to every single one of those requirements quantitatively. How do you support this? Is it a stock piece of functionality? Does it require customization? Does it require a third party? Things of that nature. And what that allows us to do is to get a risk profile for what's involved in implementing that system and where the gaps are. A vendor not meeting one requirement may not preclude them from being a potential solution, but when it comes to implementation, we're going to understand where we need to dial in on that statement of work as we're engaging that vendor to make certain that that piece of functionality is addressed. Once we get RFP responses back from a vendor and we've determined a short list of vendors that are going to make the cut, we conduct a scripted demo. So in other words, we provide scripts for the vendor on here's what we need to see. Take us through this process. And we also score the vendor demonstrations, and we involve the client in that process. Once we arrive at viable solutions that fall out of that decision support, we look at the total cost of ownership and compare those viable options. And obviously perform the diligence check regarding references, security, and compliance. In terms of if I'm dealing with a software as a service provider, do they have their SOC reports available? Do they have references? What kind of SLA can I get from them? And those check marks definitely have to be addressed before you're going forward. So that's basically going to cover the details on what I call the replacement/selection. And that'd be the last one of the 3 swim lanes that we have to cover here as far as the initiatives. And I'll go ahead and turn it over to Labi, which is, I think, Labi, you're going to cover our first, case study.
Yep, that is correct. Thank you very much, Chuck. Just to give a real-life example of how a company can follow the assessment process we have described to address its system challenges and also come up with solutions. Let's go through the case study of our client. We'll call the company V just to protect client information. The company's business processes included core financials, operations, that is purchasing, inventory, manufacturing, and quality management. Sales and customer relationship management was also another focal process area. This company undertook a system assessment and selection project that resulted in the implementation of NetSuite as the ERP system. And NetSuite was further integrated with other related enterprise systems such as Workday Adaptive Planning for financial planning, Salesforce for customer relationship management, Avalara for tax, and Tipalti for procurement and payment automation. The entire replacement project lasted about 8 months, and this was a replacement project. So it makes sense to have all the due diligence as well as implementation planning and overall implementation that resulted in that kind of timeline. And to provide the background, the company was developing a revolutionary diagnostic test kit that empowered anyone to test for any infection anywhere near 100% accuracy. And the company had obtained FDA approval and was preparing to go commercial. But they had a number of challenges. They were on an older ERP system that wasn't agile, timely, or efficient. Data entry and reporting was cumbersome and very repetitive. The other ancillary systems that they had couldn't support the sales and go-to-market requirements for commercialization of a new product. And reporting from their systems were lacking industry-specific functionality, such as those needed for compliance. So what was the strategy for addressing all of these challenges? Well, the company engaged us to conduct a comprehensive fit gap assessment and make recommendations. And the approach we took included a comprehensive review of their business processes, revisiting the strategic goals to understand the system gaps, vendor management, including evaluating RFPs from shortlisted vendors, vendor demonstration, and scoring guides to determine which platform supports their unique needs. And since reporting was a major challenge, the assessment strategy also focused on increased visibility into reporting so that decisions are data-driven. The assessment also focused on automation. And by the way, this was in the middle of the pandemic. So the company was compelled to automate approval workflows to remove manual processes related to document routing and approval throughout the organization. So with all this, what were the client outcomes? Company V selected and implemented NetSuite, as I indicated at the beginning. NetSuite emerged out of 5 competing systems, including the existing legacy system. And it was the one that seemed most configurable, scalable, and most cost-effective to support their commercialization needs. Another major outcome from the NetSuite implementation was improved supply chain visibility. The company was able to collaborate seamlessly with suppliers, contract manufacturers, and their third-party logistic partners to forecast and plan for production and distribute products. Another outcome was that they were able to generate real-time reporting, including dashboards, KPIs, key performance indicators, to inform management decision-making. And it wasn't just NetSuite that was implemented, as I indicated. The company integrated additional applications so that they could have a more robust enterprise system landscape for the commercialization. And that, as I mentioned, included adaptive planning for planning, customer relationship management, they implemented Salesforce. For sales tax automation and reporting, they implemented Avalara. And for AP automation, they implemented Tipalti. And this was a case where it made sense to take that kind of best and breeds approach to make sure that the company has an integrated platform of very powerful solutions that would enable it scale to support the commercialization requirements. It was a significant investment of time and resources to improve their IT systems. And in the end, I believe it was well worth it. Chuck?
Thanks, Labi. So the next case study I'd like to present here be Company O, again, to protect the client. Company O was working on and launched a disruptive accountable healthcare treatment model for chronic health conditions, diabetes, hypertension, those types of things. And we got together with them pre-revenue, and they determined right away that their pre-revenue system wasn't going to get them where they needed to be. So this is probably, this slide tries to capture about almost 5 years worth of the life cycle with this client. But the first thing that we did was a selection, very rapid selection for an ERP to replace that pre-revenue bookkeeping system and deal with a national footprint where there were entities required in certain states because they actually had clinical practitioners that were part of this accountable healthcare program. The system that was selected was NetSuite. It was driven by the capability for multi-company setup, as well as the integration capabilities of NetSuite, being able to talk to other systems. Rapidly after that, there were integration projects to address some AP automation and payroll so that they were able to do some automations into NetSuite and reduce the lift on both of those processes in the back office. And once that was established and we had, dealt with the pre-revenue requirements of payroll and procurement, we pivoted into the revenue cycle. And as we got into the revenue cycle, things got interesting. We found that there was a homegrown system for encounters. There was a billing system because even though this was accountable healthcare, they're still living in a fee-for-service world. So there was an encounter system, a billing system. And those two systems weren't talking to each other. So originally our charter was, can you get data from our billing system into NetSuite so that we're able to record the revenue and also manage the revenue? Because there was some risk on accountable healthcare contracts. You potentially have clawbacks and there's things you need to do to address ASC 606 and those types of things. What we quickly found was that their encounter system wasn't talking to their billing system, so there was a major log jam there. So we leveraged the same integration platform as a service as we evaluated getting those two systems talking, and we're able to leverage an existing system to get that internal encounter system creating claims in their billing system that and then the billing system could automatically scrub and drop those claims. So did great things for their cash position and their revenue cycle, and that's the point that the project is today. So in the case of this company, we looked at a selection process and multiple integration projects to address what I found was an extremely disruptive business model where systems probably didn't exist at that point in time for what they were doing and probably still don't. So it was a very, very challenging client to be involved in. So, and I'll turn it over to Rich here for the final polling question.
All right, Chuck, thanks. That was both those case studies were interesting to hear. Different types of businesses and different issues to address. Now, for our fourth and final polling question, which of the following systems is integrated with or part of your ERP financial management system? So again, pretty straightforward, and no one is grading these. We're not doing anything with the data. We just want to make sure that you all get your CPE credit. So we'll give everyone a minute or two to make sure that they select and submit. And Chuck and Labi, there was on one of the slides, you mentioned security, and I guess we had a whole hour last week on security. How does that security assessment come into play in an implementation, and at what point?
I can quickly take on that. For cloud-hosted systems, I would definitely recommend that you ask for attestation from the vendor on their data security policy. And usually that's provided in the SOC 1 or SOC 2 reports. These tend to be reliable. I mean, I would say cloud service providers tend to be reliable vendors who invest heavily in data security. But even so, you are responsible for entity-level controls around logical access. So you need to protect your system and also make sure that the vendor is doing what they're supposed to do on their end. Now, for your side of things, you want to make sure that you have single sign-on to protect access to your system. You're doing two-factor authentication if you can't do single sign-on. And beyond that, if you are on a cloud platform, well, make sure that you are continuing to undertake that assessment of your security, because this is a different climb. There's a lot of cyber intrusion out there. Continue to conduct the assessment as to, how strong your access security is. And if you're doing that regularly, you should be in a good state.
All right, good to hear. All right, we're going to wrap up. Give everyone about 10 more seconds to select and submit. Don't forget that submit button. And then we will wrap up the call. All right. So seems like most have banking and payroll, which I guess can be expected. So we are closing up on the hour, so we don't have any more time for Q&A, so I apologize. But feel free to reach out to any of the presenters on today's call. They're always happy to talk about these issues with anyone. So we hope you've enjoyed today's call. We also hope that you're able to attend the 2 previous parts of this webinar series. Digital transformation has accelerated, and there are significant opportunities, but also risks. So we understand that you all had your hands full, and it's a challenge, but their opportunities are great. So again, thank you all for joining, and I'll turn it over to Amy, who will go through some final housekeeping.
All right, thank you, Rich, and thank you, Labi and Chuck, for a great presentation today. I also want to thank our audience for being engaged and submitting your questions to help guide today's conversation. And if you met all CPE requirements, your certificate is available to download now in the CPE progress window. A copy will be emailed within 2 weeks should you have difficulty downloading it now. And finally, here is a link to an online survey for today's presentation. And thank you for joining us. We hope you'll join us again next time. Take care, everyone.
Bye, everyone.